Good evening. Welcome to WSCI Channel 7 News. We have an update on the break-in that occurred at the NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston. Initially, NASA officials assured members of the media that the burglars were scared away before they were able to take anything from the lab. However, in a news conference earlier today, NASA explained that this may not have been the case. Let's hear what they have to say.
Early this morning at 2:17 Eastern Standard Time, 3 individuals broke into a lab at NASA's Johnson Space Center. Alarms alerted security of the break-in. Within minutes, security officials arrived at the lab, but the burglars were no longer there. It now appears that before security arrived, the individuals were able to obtain core samples that were recently brought back from Mars. NASA is working with local and federal authorities, and we are confident that the perpetrators will soon be apprehended and that the core samples will be returned to the lab. Are there any questions? Yes?
Do these core samples threaten public health?
There is little likelihood that the public will be harmed in any way from these samples.
What does little likelihood mean?
I'm sorry, I'm going to let Dr. Wild answer that question.
Several of the samples were tested as soon as we received them a week ago, and they all show strong evidence of living microbes, most likely bacteria. Now, most bacteria does not pose a threat to humans. In fact, we couldn't survive without many forms of helpful bacteria in our bodies.
What evidence do you have that the samples contain Martian bacteria?
That's an excellent question. The samples were placed in airtight containers as soon as they were removed from the surface of Mars. We have kept them sealed so as to protect any life that they may contain within them. You may remember from science class that all living things, human as well as bacteria, breathe. More accurately, scientists would say that they respire or exchange gases. Several tests were done on the gases contained within the Martian core samples. From one test to the next, the relative amounts of gases changed significantly. Gases like water vapor, oxygen, carbon dioxide. This is strong evidence that something lives, most likely bacteria, within the Martian core samples.
But how can we be sure these Martian bacteria might not be harmful to humans? There are certainly types of bacteria here on Earth that are deadly to humans.
That's another very good question.
Yeah, we don't want to speculate on this right now. I just want to confirm that although the core samples from Mars were removed from the lab at the Johnson Space Center early this morning, the authorities are assuring us that they will be returned safely into NASA's hands very soon. NASA will provide the members of the media with updates as they arise. Thank you very much.
There you have it. Martian core samples, possibly containing bacteria from the Red Planet, were stolen last evening in a break-in at the NASA lab in Houston. Please stay tuned for the latest developments in this unsettling story. And now the latest on the Martian core sample caper. This story continues to provide a roller coaster of emotion. Federal authorities are withholding the names of the 3 individuals who were apprehended late last night. Although they have confirmed that the core samples are indeed safely back in NASA hands, we have learned that things are not as simple as they once appeared last evening.
Good afternoon. As reported yesterday, the Martian core samples are back in Houston. However, the individuals responsible for their theft made copies of the samples that they apparently intended to sell on the black market. NASA scientists are now analyzing all of the samples to determine which are the actual samples and which are the counterfeits. One of the burglars has cooperated with authorities and revealed the materials used in the copied samples. The containers all look the same, however, so no one, not even the perpetrators, know which item is in which container. Although it is unfortunate that NASA has to waste valuable resources on this issue, I want to assure you that there is no doubt we will solve this case very soon. Thank you.
And so NASA now has more samples than they began with, but most of these samples are fake. Our own Action News roving reporter learns how NASA scientists may go about figuring out which containers hold Martian life and which do not.
This is Elaine Simmons with WSCI News. I'm with Dr. Stevens, a physicist at University Research Lab. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome. Good to be here.
Dr. Stevens, why can't NASA scientists simply open the containers and take a look inside?
That's a good question. Opening the containers is only a problem for the specific samples that NASA's worried about. Since these probes extracted the samples from Mars, they've been sealed, and none of the gases that are in there that NASA's interested in have been able to escape. If we simply opened the containers, those gases would escape and we'd contaminate our experiment and unable to make the measurements. Much like if you had a cut, the doctors are very careful when they put medication on you not to give you an infection. So this contamination is much like an infection, and once that happens, we can't make the measurements. So NASA has to be very, very careful, and we have to use methods that don't allow us to open up these materials, and we'll talk about how we do that next.
So if they can't open them up, what are they going to do? Call in Superman and his X-ray vision?
Well, not quite. It's similar to X-ray vision of Superman, but it's a little different, and I'll explain to you in a moment how we do this.
NASA has learned that the following items make up the 8 different samples: clay, cork, wood, nickel watch battery, steel washer, copper penny, rubberized cork, and Martian core sample.
Scientists will probe the contents of each container with special tools that we call sensors. Each material will react to the sensor in its own particular way. This will allow us to determine the difference between one material and another without having to open the container.
Dr. Stevens explains that the following sensors and other tools will likely be used to identify the different samples: X-rays, metal detector, magnetometer, balance, mass spectrometer. So there you have it. NASA scientists will use their understanding of the physical characteristics of different materials to solve the puzzle. Sounds like a scenario middle school kids would be asked to figure out in science, huh, Blake?
Indeed. It's been a very long time since I took middle school science, so I'm very happy that I don't have to figure out this dilemma. How about you? To see more of our interview with Dr. Stevens, please log on to our website and search for Dr. Stevens Interview. Good evening and safe travels.